In the Stuart period, there was an enemy far more terrifying than an army or household vermin, the deadly Yersinia pestis, otherwise known as the plague. Epidemics had come and gone over the centuries, but in 1665 there was a double whammy. Extra virulent forms of bubonic plague carried by rats and the airborne pneumonic plague. The symptoms were horrific. The glands swell up to form the characteristic buboes in the armpits and groin, which later burst and ooze fetid pus. The blood vessels rupture and leak under the skin, causing dark bruises. When the infection enters the lungs, the victim coughs up a bloody froth, spreading the disease through the air. The only compensation is that you could be dead within hours. The plague was so infectious that a third of the population of London died. A whole army of people were employed to try and contain the disease. My first job is the Seekers of the Dead. Despite the title, finding the dead wasn't the point. The seekers' or searchers' role was to examine the corpses and decide how they died, like a form of untrained coroner. Who were these women who were searching for the dead?
I was going to say ordinary old women like you and me. Ordinary old women in the village, in the village or the town, probably pensioners, people who are dependent on charity in any case. And to be the searcher of the dead, which is what the title is, would mean that they got a bit of extra money.
So would we say, right, this is a plague victim?
Well, I think we'd be very tempted to say so. She's got typical blackish, purplish blotches on her face and further down. But what's most characteristic, diagnostic of plague, is that she's clearly had some kind of abscess under her jaw, probably in the lymph glands, and that's the plague bubo. But we think we'd have to spend a bit of time talking to other people in the household. You find out what the person has been going through, what form the illness had taken. I mean, they wouldn't just look at the bodies and say, oh, this is this, this is that. They would definitely take the time to ask around and to see what other evidence there was of why the person had died.
How would these people have been regarded in the village?
With a mixture of sort of respect and perhaps fear also, because they do have quite a lot of power in the sense that they can come into your house and they pronounce on what the person has died of. I think anybody's very cautious about making a plague diagnosis because it has such implications for the family. It means shutting the house up and preventing other people from leaving and so on and so forth.
Might we have been tempted to take a few bob just to say...
well, given that it would have such consequences for the household, we might just be a bit fuddled or a bit careless about how we noted it down.
The Seekers of the Dead gathered information for bills of mortality, the lists of weekly deaths and their supposed causes. From them, parishes could spot new outbreaks and try and prevent them spreading. But it was a pretty imprecise science.
One of the things about the bills of mortality is it's not modern diagnostic medicine. A lot of it is simply describing the symptoms. So somebody might be said to have died of a cough, or of rising of the lights, which means a kind of suffocation, or of dropsy or tympany, swelling of the abdomen, or of a thought, or of a stroke, or planet struck. A whole range of things that tell you what happened, but don't to us explain why it happened.
Why would they do it? Why would you be poking around with people who could give you diseases that could kill you?
If you're paid threepence or fourpence for viewing a corpse, that's worth having. And sometimes you don't have any choice. I think if you're an old, poor person, then you really don't have much option.
But far worse than examining corpses would have been actually having to pick them up and carry them off to be buried. Imagine handling rotting bodies and trying to avoid the pus oozing from the burst buboes. At the very least, it was tough physical work. Inside the City of London, they used to have guys with carts who'd fill them up with the dead bodies and then ride with them through London at night so that they could avoid direct contact with the rest of the population. But where they didn't have carts, they might use a canvas hold-all thing like that, or particularly when there were slopes, they'd use a hay sledge like this one, which they would pull by hand. Initially, everybody got a proper burial, but after a while, when there were so many dead bodies, they just used to dig a big pit, and then they'd throw the bodies in and cover them with lime and chuck earth on top of that. It was actually a nightmare of a job being one of these buriers for two reasons. Firstly, because you were forced to live inside the cemetery, and secondly, you were only allowed to work when it was dark, so it must have been virtually impossible for them to see what they were doing.
I say 50%.